to it.
I've been wanting to do this for years, actually. So I just had to find the right outlet, venue, and time
That's
situation to
right.
do it. And I was probably
That's exactly
overthinking
right.
it. I've been overthinking it before, but then I just realized just make it simple and just take it from there.
Exactly. Sometimes simple is smarter. So yeah,
Yeah,
little weekly recap. I love it. I love it.
yeah. We'll keep it like that. So we'll get right on to it because I know you have a hard stop, and so do I at 11:30. I have
Okay, cool. You're gonna cut all
presentation.
this out, right?
What was that?
You're gonna cut all this out, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to. Yeah, I got
Okay, cool, cool. Whenever you're ready, man.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So, man, it's been a crazy week. Like this week, it's been like what, 6 days in since MLK Day or Inauguration Day. Feel like a lifetime already. Like it feels like a tale of two Januaries. I feel like
I
there was the
agree.
first 19 days of 2025, and now we have these past 5 days, and it feels just 4 or 5 days. It feels like a whole different universe in itself, man. What do you think about all that?
Man, January has been a long month, Clay. I saw somebody say on Twitter or X the other day that next week is still January. And that
It
was
still
just
is.
a shocker to me because it has felt long. And you're right. I think since Inauguration Day or MLK Day, whichever your preference, it has felt long. It has felt heavy for some folks. And it's just been crazy, no matter how much you flip it. And so I think with what we've seen this past week, this first week, Trump's first stop after being inaugurated was to my home state, North Carolina, a state we both love. And
Mhm.
he toured some of that Western North Carolina hurricane damage. He also made a pretty wild announcement that he wanted to get rid of FEMA and just have states pay for their own relief after disasters. Then he went out to California, where Gavin Newsom really showed the man that he was and that he wouldn't bow down to Trump. And I really do hope that they can work somewhat together and push through and really support and defend California from these blazes that continue. And then just last night, right, we saw Pete Hegseth, one of Trump's nominees for Secretary of Defense, barely make it through. And JD Vance, one of his first major actions since being sworn in, had to break that tie. And so it just goes to show you that we're in for another unprecedented 4 years, in my opinion. And so, as you and I often talk about, I think we have to hold on to hope at the local level and really invest in one another and support one another as community.
Yeah, for sure. This is now more than ever the time that local, not local elections, but local governance is going to matter. That's going to be your hope and your faith. Like California, regardless of what you think about Karen Bass, that's your mayor. You still got Gavin Newsom as your governor. Um, until Kamala Harris decides to run for governor, which I think is going to happen. But
I could see that.
I'm
I could
just
see
saying.
that. I
Yeah,
don't know. I like it. I like getting back to the governor pathway. I mean, we had one of the amazing governors, the education governor, and Jim Hunt in North Carolina. But even just thinking back a few weeks ago to Jimmy Carter in his passing, right? He was governor of Georgia first.
yeah,
Kamala Harris might run for governor of California. And I heard earlier this week that Vivek Ramaswamy is going to run for governor of Ohio or something. So
yeah. I
maybe
heard
people
that.
are going the governor route. Did you hear
I
that?
heard that. I did hear that, and not surprised. I mean, it's just that's what you're going to see. But I think that's a good first test. I'm trying not to stay in political campaign mode, but I can't help it because that's basically what I do in profession.
Right.
But um, start to find a good primary challenger, even if you're a registered Republican. So I'm
Right.
going to say get into the weeds of that early and often because this 4 years it's going to be a marathon, not a sprint. Because you try to sprint, if you're on advocacy or on the activist side, you're going to burn out. Heck, it's been
Exactly.
not even been a full week and I've already crashed out. Like I didn't even hear about the FEMA piece. And I should know that, but because Trump is such a good headline generator, because he's an entertainer, he's going to keep on having multiple tabs up on the MacBook. Like, oh, okay,
Exactly.
this going on, there's that going on too, and
Right.
I mean, just look at the YouTube channel for the White House. It's already a lot different. With Biden's, it was slow and steady, like all the time. You know what was going on. It wasn't 10 million, 10 different events going on or subplots going on at
Right.
once. But now, because I had to unfollow. Well, I'm not gonna unfollow. I don't do that stuff. I believe you should be informed regardless of who or what's occupying what office or whatnot. That's why when people were talking about the Facebook and Instagram accounts, I'm like, I'm not going to go through the process of unfollowing because as someone with a
Right,
journalist background too, I don't like when people say I'm not going to watch the news. I don't like people say I'm going to tune out or I want to unfollow. I don't believe we should be blind. I think I've told you this too. We can't afford to be blind or deaf to what's going on. I understand we all have mental health processes that we have to go through. But once you
right,
get that space for a moment or however long it has to be, whatever therapy you have to endure or self-care, you got to get right back on it. You got to know what's going
right,
on because I didn't even know about feed the fever figure until you mentioned that. I saw the press conference, a little bit of that with him and Karen Bass yesterday that started to get it started out professional, then it got quite heated. And he was in our home state where we're both registered to vote yesterday and everything like that. They didn't get as much headlines as California, obviously, because it's California's California. But
right.
yeah, you
Yeah,
can't
I
afford.
agree with you. I agree. I think the self care piece is very important, right? And I've told you this before as well. We've talked about it. I'm not a big fan of totally unplugging from the wall, but hey, sometimes we all need a recharge, right? We all need to go and do not disturb. But I still have all of my social media accounts. I think it's important that you do stay informed, but I do understand folks who say, okay, Trump is back in office. I'm going to have to tone down how much I'm on social media. I do understand that point. I also think just with everything going on that marginalized groups in particular, we have to stay informed, right? Nobody's seeking us out to inform us about all of these things that harm us. And so we have to stay informed however we can, but it is important to also take care of our mental, to take care of our families and make sure we're staying in touch with our friends. I just wanted to ask you. I know a lot happened yesterday, right? FEMA, Gavin Newsom, and Karen Bass out in California. What stood out to you this week in the political world, or even not in the political world?
Yeah, for sure. That's a good multi-verse way of looking at it. Certainly the DEI components. Um, and that stands out the most. I mean, again, like I said, last week was not even a full work week, and it feels like a million things went down. But I've been sounding the alarm, and I don't know if we mentioned this offline. I don't think DEI has been very effective, and I haven't been the biggest supporter or advocate or proponent of it. And I'm going to tell you why. And this is a free form
Okay,
show, so we're not bought and paid or sponsored by anybody but ourselves here. So
that's
I
right.
believe that DEI has either innately, intentionally, or indirectly has propped up more of a professional, corporate, dare I use the word bougie class of black professionals or brown professionals and such. I don't think it's been wide expanses enough to where it's covering all areas of historically marginalized groups, more especially in our community, African American community. To me, and it's almost like when you had the passage of the Civil Rights Acts in the 60s. It wasn't like the 64 Act didn't cover fair housing or the Voting Rights Act. That's why you had subsequent legislations, obviously by Lyndon Johnson and such in those particular Congresses back then.
Hmm.
I think DEI is not legislation, which we have to be very clear on that. It's an
Say it. Say
initiative.
it.
People need to, it's not legislation, people. So it's an initiative that has its roots in affirmative action and other pieces from the Civil Rights Act and such. Um, and of course, and we all know that over time that the biggest beneficiary were white women, in many respects. But as it relates to DEI, and as we know it in the past few years, the whole selling and marketing of that, I think we got ourselves in this position because we had standalone DEI positions, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they're great titles, and there's great people working these roles. But let's be real. I don't think it's really has been effective, and I think it's been more a dog and pony show, excuse my French, than actually really addressing all the way down to the working man, the working poor. To me, I think the best way you strengthen DEI, and I think you would even have people on the right who are smart mind or common sense. It covers everybody. What I mean by everybody is, does it help the guy who has a criminal record who wants to get a job, even at McDonald's? Does it help a guy who wants to work in a managerial role in a hotel, but can't because he may have some skills gaps that he wasn't able to get at college because of college affordability and all those other barriers that people who look like us may endure. Or does it provide loans to entrepreneurs or content creators or any funds who want to basically monetize by being a content creator or wanting to start their own business, but they can't because of poor credit, poor poor financial history. Does it affect those areas? So if you start in those areas, that benefits white people too. And if you benefit them, just like we've seen with Obamacare, ain't nobody gonna fight that. Ain't nobody gonna ever fight eating,
Right.
having money at the end of the day. Because
Yeah.
that's a primal need that we all have.
Totally, totally. No, I think that's great. I agree. The DEI rollback, and like you said, it's a policy, not necessarily a law. I do want people to understand that. So it's not like Trump just, I mean, he may and is trying to do this with other pieces of legislation, but he went in on day one and signed a bunch of executive orders, rolled back a bunch of policies, but he's not rolling back laws. That does take an act of Congress to veto, to roll back and invalidate laws. But let's talk about it. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, I agree with Clay generally, and we have talked about this a little bit offline. One of the reasons we wanted to bring some of these conversations to you all is so that we can get your advice and opinions. So definitely feel free to comment and reach out to us so we can continue having these conversations. In my view, DEI and its enactment was definitely a dog and pony show. And somebody was making this point, I can't remember who the other day, that generally it sounds good, right? Especially to marginalized groups. And it may be helpful to Clay's point, even at the managerial level and above. But when you talk about the poor and the working class, and I really do think that economic equality is the way of the future for marginalized folks, DEI doesn't really help, right? We saw it really come to fruition in 2020. Just a little bit of backstory after George Floyd was brutally murdered. And a bunch of these companies, Google, Uber, Facebook, said that they were going to invest in Black people in particular, invest in people of color. That was DEI to them. 1 year later, in the summer of 2020, I was doing an internship, and part of my task was to track those contributions or those pledges and promises. And almost half of them were not even coming to fruition. They weren't happening. And so it was more a talk, and there was no way to hold these companies accountable. And so I think that's where you can even talk about this overlap, right, Clay, between public policy and private or personal responsibility. Because a lot of people have been talking about how this DEI rollback or civilian freeze and the way that the federal government is changing their policies is going to affect private companies and private businesses. Because if they see the government not caring about DEI, or let's just call it racial equity, then they don't feel like they have to at all because they're private.
Target.
And so this stuff makes a difference, right? I think Hakeem Jeffries, and he's hit or miss for me, to be honest, but Hakeem Jeffries said something yesterday that I do think makes sense. And I think you alluded to this, Clay. I think the way that DEI was marketed was terrible. Just like the way that defund the police has good roots, but was marketed terribly in 2020. And I say that to say, he said America was founded on DEI. Just think about this. America was started by diverse peoples and immigrants from all backgrounds, notwithstanding the fact that we took this land from Native Americans. The 14th Amendment is an example of equity or equality because we had to add protections for marginalized groups, namely former enslaved peoples. And then America is all about inclusion. I mean, we say when we stand up in school, Pledge of Allegiance, justice and liberty for all. So, what are we talking about here? When we say DEI is not American or there is no systemic racism anymore, that's not true. It's baked into our laws, and those may be legal fictions or fallacies, right? The people who wrote the Constitution, the people who wrote those amendments may not have really believed it. But to Clay's point, that is now the law, and those are protections we can use and are built into our system. And so America does have these roots in diversity and being equal or equitable and in including everyone. America is based on community. And so, however you want to package it, to Clay's point, I think we've got to make sure that we put this stuff into the law, into our communal practices, into our business practices, and make it a normal habit to be kind, right? And to make sure that we're protecting people who are a little more vulnerable in this society. That's how I see it.
For sure, for sure. But you saw what Target did yesterday, right? They followed
Yes, I did see that. I
they
saw a lot of
followed
people
suit.
saying, I'm only going to Costco from now on.
I ain't
I
going
don't know
that
about
far.
that, but hey,
But hey, but not to go back to you know, I don't want to act like this is 2009 or the 2010s, but again, shop local. If you can, shop local. That was
right,
really big after the Great Recession, shop local or small business Saturday, all that. But hey, it, it it does matter, especially in these times, especially when you have retailers closing their storefront properties. So hey,
right.
call them lifeline.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, let's talk about that. Let's stay on it for a
yeah,
second. So the rollback, because I want to hear your thoughts. DEI rollback at Target. I think specifically, I read it was taking the form, or it's going to take the form of them not investing as many minority suppliers, right? And then some other folks, I think Walmart may be rolling back their DEI policies, but Costco is holding on to theirs. So again, with the businesses and their focus or their lack of focus on people of color, what do you think about that? I mean, do you think it's actually going to make a difference? It's hard for folks of one group or another to boycott these businesses these days because they have diverse workers, right? It's not like the Montgomery bus boycott where you could boycott the white busing system. Like there are black folks who work at Target. So
yeah.
what are we supposed to do?
Well, here's the thing. It's hard to boycott like those days because everything is diversified. Our living experiences are diversified, and that's because of corporatism and globalism, and such. So you really cannot collectively, you cannot pull it off as successfully as you once could because it takes a whole lot of work, it takes a whole lot of people jumping aboard. And quite frankly, you might be telling folks to not work a job at Target. It's not as easy as telling folks back in the 50s and 60s don't ride a bus or don't do this, where you actually have meaningful results because those
Right.
were more subsetted to local cities and local businesses as such. Thing is, though, is that like with Woolworths, yeah, that was more of a regional chain or national chain, but you had people on focus with that. But nowadays, if somebody can shop online, that's just you just can't pull it off. And people are more pessimistic too. It's
Mm-hmm.
like that's why we were never really able to boycott the NFL because you have globalism and you have a big corporate hand involved. You just can't do it to something that's more mom and pop owned, for
Right.
instance. And there's a reason why over time a lot of businesses like Woolworth didn't survive because they kind of had that stain of having to being segregated. They had that history of it. And Woolworth didn't die out immediately, but it died out eventually.
Right.
And because they never, even as a business model, never really diversify. And Woolworth even predates me. If you be
Right.
well,
Right. Give the
but
people, Clay, some background on what Woolworths is and why it's so important to the civil rights movement.
yeah, well, Woolworths was a department store, five and dime department store. It was basically was Walmart before Walmart. It was kind of the predecessor to Walmart and such. So you would have Woolworths in malls, or you would have them in downtown cities like in Greensboro, and that was in Nashville. And during the 60s, I had the famous sit-ins. Like in February 1st, 1960, you had several students from the campus of A&T basically starting that whole national sit-in that occurred, and then Nashville Woolworth boycott subsequently followed. And that was a huge moment and a huge turning point in the civil rights movement when it came to essentially proving that these type of nonviolent protests work. But yeah, there was a time where Woolworths lunch counters would not seat black folks, especially in the southern stores and whatnot, and maybe even in more of a de jour fashion up north. So a lot of times, people would have to get food from the back of the kitchen, their leftovers, even though you would have black cooks, but you couldn't even sit down at a lunch counter. So yeah,
Mm.
that's the backstory behind Woolworth. So But over time, they did lose business, just from a corporately and such. And by the late 80s and early 90s, and they just completely just shuttered its doors and never really diversified. And Walmart pretty much is modeled after the Woolworths, because even at some point Walmart had lunch counters, and not necessarily lunch counters, but like McDonald's and Subway inside. They don't really do those now anymore. But yeah, there was a time
Right.
there. But yeah. But
Yeah,
just to as far as just boycotting this day and age, you can't really boycott. Yeah, you just can't. It's just too, especially within the digital spaces, it's just hard because people are more self-interested these days too, compared to
totally. Totally. And
that,
I
that's the
wanted to,
main component of it, if you want me to be honest.
yeah,
People be like, well, shoot, that don't apply to me. And we kind of see that unfold with the inauguration in certain hip hop stars, rap stars, performing, mainly out of self-interest, more so than an actual political ideology, which is a
right.
good segue for that. So, what are your thoughts on the whole controversy or backlash of Nelly, Soulja Boy, and all these celebrities performing at the
Snoop Dogg.
inauguration and such?
Yeah, Snoop. I mean, I just don't like, to your point, how individualistic we've become, how attached to money we've become in America. And I don't like hypocrisy. And so you probably saw, but a video came out where Snoop Dogg was cussing out folks who performed during Trump's first inauguration and call them coons or something like that, basically turncoats. And I don't understand how he's now, right? He has tons of money, is doing the same thing, right? He's doing exactly what he called out however many years ago. And I don't think that is a good look. Um, but hey, if folks want to do that and that's how they want to spend their time, I wouldn't do that. I might not necessarily agree because I feel like that is co-signing Trump and his ideologies, but I'm not really worried about that because this inauguration actually had a really low viewer rate. So folks weren't even tuned in. I think Carrie Underwood decided to perform. Her music, her backtrack wasn't even working. She didn't shake Kamala's hand. Like there's so much performative stuff right now that I just don't have as much care or time to worry about that. But what
Yeah.
are your thoughts, real quick? Because I want to
Yeah.
get back to a topic that you were talking about earlier. But what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm with you there. Like, look, I'm not gonna tell people how to make their money and such, but just prepare for the backlash that comes with that. I would like to have an explanation from Snoop. Since you had an explanation before, I'd like one now, but it's been relative silence. I mean, Soulja Boy had and Nelly gave some explanations, whether that was received or not, but Snoop definitely needs to tell us something. That's just how I
Right,
feel on that. As far as inauguration viewership, I think that's also just more of a byproduct of the way we're consuming TV or media these days, as opposed to,
probably
well,
so.
I could watch it because of Trump. I think if it was Kamala, maybe been higher. I don't think it would have been significantly higher. I'm just being
Hmm.
honest because people are more cutting cords and consuming media in much different ways with each passing year now. So I think that's just really just more. We're not going to see Obama 2009 numbers again
Right.
in your television. But yeah, let's definitely just move on from that. But yeah, so
Yeah, I wanted to
it was,
talk on that same note. Actually, the way that we consume media, that little TikTok ban, not ban, all of
oh
these
yeah.
not content creators, but all of these social media CEOs at the inauguration. What are your thoughts on all of that? TikTok specifically, but the power that we seem to be giving these corporate businessmen in politics.
Yeah, it's it just shows you who they are. And again, it goes back to self-interest. You had OpenAI CEO there, you had Zuckerberg there, the same person who banned you 4 years ago after January 6th. He's now at a front row seat and wants to get rid of the disinformation. It's simply self-interest and you're kissing the rings of Trump. That's what it is. I don't think it's necessarily an affection. I just think that it's kissing rings and it's self-interest for themselves and their respective companies. Now, regarding the TikTok ban, I'm not as heavily on TikTok as I probably should be, but I just feel as though that the ban, whether that goes through or not, I think it will be back open again. I mean, I think it already has, but
Yeah, it is. Hmm.
again, there's so much going on. It's like you can't even keep track of one thing constantly. But that was a big story of the week before leading up to inauguration, before everything else kind of ensued. I just feel as though when it comes to content creating, it goes back to my earlier point, even with DEI. We got to make sure that we invest in creators because creators are the new entertainers.
Right.
And they're business people. They're monetized. We need to make sure that they have protections and rights as a 9 to 5 person does, or any one of the more traditional business model sets. I think a lot of us still see content creators as just people making videos dancing. Sometimes it's silly, stupid, or creepy stuff gets more clicks and
Right.
views. And the times I'm afraid to open these apps and I see things that make my skin crawl and stomach turn. I don't even know how it gets there because of the algorithm. Yeah, like worms coming out of people's eyes. I'm like, what the? Like
Right.
stuff that literally just takes my appetite away. Like, oh man.
Yeah, they
But
have some crazy stuff on there, but to your point, I mean, there's a little bit of something for everyone, and I think that's
there's
why people like it, right? They don't have to go scroll through the TV guide, but they can actually just go to their phones, and there's something there that's probably created for them, whether it's weird and gory or whether it's something uplifting or funny. And there are a bunch of TikTok dance trends that have then migrated over to other social media platforms. So I do think that social media is becoming, well, it already is the way of the world, but with TikTok and content creators, to your point, I do hope that they're uplifted and supported, but because right now it seems like folks are kind of making them I don't know, a bargaining chip
yeah,
with political administrations.
there needs to be policy advocated and how we navigate in this administration. Of course, that's gonna be a challenge, just like with any other issue on the table. But you're gonna have to this is where I think this is where local governance can really make a play. Like, hey, if California wants to have some legislative enact initiatives for content creators, being during the entertainment capital of the world, or New York, right? Let's do it. Hey, North Carolina, since y'all do a lot of filming, why don't let's see if we can get Josh Stein on board with the film commission, see if we can integrate something with social media content creators. It's the perfect time for that. Federal governments, let's just be real, it's going to be what it is for the next 4 years. So you're going to have to navigate that a little differently, and such. But there's a personal responsibility part of me that's going to be like, don't just live and die on social media. Heck, I'm even telling my own self this. You have to diversify all around. But at the same time, it does not excuse those who have the abilities to not want to invest, meaning politicians or those who are on the top, lobbyists or those with corporate interests, everything, because they're gonna pull the strings. And if you completely unplug, you're gonna have people going through withdrawal and not knowing what to do. So I could speak on a personal responsibility side, and I could speak on it from a legislative time when it comes to those particular matters. But I
Yeah,
personally believe, and I will advocate for this, that we have protections, we have grants, we have some subsidies for content creators just all around to shape our new creator economy and the economies that we're going to be in this year
yeah.
on, because it's not going to go away.
No, it's not.
It's
It's
not.
not going to go away. It's not. Let's keep it in North Carolina real quick. I know we're wrapping up here,
Mhm.
and hopefully this is a way that you all can tune in, excuse me, every week and get a quick hit of our thoughts on the news. But let's stay in North Carolina. Justice Allison Riggs had a small win in the Supreme Court earlier this week. What are your thoughts on that? You got Jefferson Griffin, a Republican judge, Allison Riggs, who's on the North Carolina Supreme Court, was running for reelection, and he's claiming that she got some invalid votes and that she was not the winner of that election. Just a basic overview. What are your thoughts on this? I mean,
Yeah,
it's really
I mean,
crazy.
we saw this with Sherry Beasley going some years back. Um, I just think that we have to make sure we debunk any misinformation out there and such, even on a local or statewide level, and such. But I am confident that the right ways will see itself in North Carolina. We do have We do have a Democratic governor. We do have some sane people in place. So we're kind of we're not necessarily Virginia or and such, with Youngkin and such. So I feel good in that regard. But yeah, our justice races is here in North Carolina speaking and such. They're certainly always are interested to see. They always come down to race for margins, but state judicial positions matter just as much as they
Right.
do on the federal Supreme Court. So that's how I particularly see that. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
but,
it's hard
but
for me to just wrap my it's hard for me to wrap my mind around it, just zooming out, because I am a North Carolina voter, as you alluded to, and it's something like 60 or 67,000 votes that he's challenging. But when I was filling out my ballot, that race, Riggs versus Griffin, was on the ballot along with all the others. So why are none of the other candidates alleging that some of these votes were invalid? It's not
exactly.
like they had their own ballot. So anyway, moving on from that, and
I
I'll
do have
let you
one
close
question
it
to
out.
ask.
Yeah,
In the interest of time. So, former Atlanta mayor, because that's where you currently reside and attend school,
right.
has flirting at the idea, openly flirting about running for governor in 2026. As we all know, Brian Kemp is term limited and such, and we also have some potential contenders being Stacey Abrams for the third consecutive time. Jason Carter is Jimmy Carter's grandson rumored and such. So I don't know if you've heard about.
Ossoff, I think, is rumored.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't even know that. So, just what are your thoughts on Keisha Lance Bottoms potentially running for governor and just the outlook? Obviously, given that you're in that state more on a daily basis these days.
Yeah, I am more so in Atlanta these days. I am in law school at Emory, as you alluded to. And I think that would be really interesting. I do think it's time to see more Black women in state governance, and especially as governors. I think it would be really cool and really special for Georgia. I like a lot of her policies and the way that she conducts herself, and she was pretty loyal to Biden and those policies. And so I think it would be interesting. I do wonder what that would look like if Stacey Abrams decides to run again. I think Jason Carter is great. He delivered a really uplifting and on time eulogy at his grandfather's funeral here a few weeks ago. And then, yeah, I've heard John Ossoff might be rumored, and I'm sure other people will jump in. So I will be monitoring that. I'm trying to plug myself in more to Atlanta politics here. And before we wrap up, I do want to mention one important story this week that I think, because we're so normalized to violence in this country, some people may not even remember or know. And that is in Nashville, a city you mentioned earlier. There was a school shooting,
Mm.
and I just want to say that my heart and thoughts and prayers do go out to the folks at that school. I think it was called Antioch High School, and at least two people died. And so I don't want us to normalize gun violence, obviously, in this country, but especially on this show. That was an important story from this week. And so we've got to do something more about gun violence, especially in North Carolina, especially here in Atlanta, where we see pretty disproportionate rates of gun violence in communities of color. So anyway, I just wanted to say that before we
Yeah,
wrap. But I do think that Georgia, just like North Carolina, is going to continue to be in the spotlight for the days, weeks, and months to come here as we push through 2025 and think about 2026.
for sure, for sure. And going back to the school shooting things, I was around when we had the first major school shooting in Columbine back in 1999. And that was very tragic. I mean, I was in school in New Jersey and we practically had a moment of silence and kind of stopped what we were doing. Now it's you're turning the page. That's I hate to say it, but I think it is normalized now. And
Yeah. Oh, I think it is. You're right.
I mean, the last major one we had was Parkland. Yeah, Parkland. Then before that, Newtown, and anywhere else between has just been so you had to almost have to find it. I
Right.
mean,
Well,
like
remember, I guess there was Uvalde where the police
yes,
officers
Uvalde
were
too. Yes, thank you
so
for adding
involved.
that. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I mean, with this administration, I that doesn't mean we should give it a fight. So, uh, obviously, you just had to keep on with it because it's a marathon, not a sprint. But the
That's
reality
right.
is that if we couldn't get it done when we had every level of power in our favor, I mean, but hey, just keep on. The grassroots groups got to keep on. Mothers everyone's gotta still play parts. Doesn't mean you give up the fight. But
Totally.
yeah.
Got to hold on to hope.
But yeah, for sure. But time is running out here. And just on this as a personal, more lighthearted matter and such, let's just talk sports real quickly. Your alma mater, UNC, Bill Belichick finally signed the contract after some rumors
I
that,
was wondering if you were going to ask me about that.
oh, you already know. I got 3 good minutes. So yeah, let's do that. So what are your thoughts on that? And I thought he was gonna maybe dip for a moment. It looked like he was that Cowboys job might have been enticing, but yeah, Cowboys chose
Yeah,
a new coach and it wasn't Deion Sanders, which I was kind of mad about, but
I
I
know.
don't like the
Same,
Cowboys
same.
now. I'm done with them now.
I I thought I I thought that Dion might go to the Cowboys. Bill Belichick did finally sign his contract at UNC Chapel Hill. It's going to be interesting. I really don't know. I don't know what to think. He's a great coach. Obviously, he knows how to play the game and win the game. Not so much there at the end of his NFL career, or at least his former NFL career. But
Yeah.
I was wondering there for a second if he might jump ship. I was just confused at what was going on there, why he hadn't signed it. I looked through it yesterday, and whoo, he's got everything he could ever want in that contract, and so I hope that it does. Um, correlate to him winning over there and really elevating the UNC football program. I have heard that maybe some folks on the UNC basketball side are upset that all of the attention now is going to the football team. But hey, that's what happens when well,
Yeah.
that's a whole nother conversation. But
It's
you got
always
to
going to
win
be a basketball
games, right?
school.
You got to win, and so that's the name of the game.
Yeah.
Which is part of the reason Belichick was brought in. So I do think it is monumental for him to be at UNC coaching. I never saw that coming until they announced it, and we'll see what happens. I'm glad he signed the contract, though. I'm ready to start this Chapel Hill Bill era.
Yeah, for sure. And UNC basketball just wins, so you won't have to complain and worry. It's still a basketball school. So just take care of business in March and you won't have to worry about Bill. Just
There you
saying.
go. There you go. The money will
All right.
flow in.
Real quickly, tomorrow, NFC AFC championship game to go to decide the Super Bowl. Who do you have?
Mm, mm, mm. I'm gonna take the Chiefs over the Bills, and mm, I'm definitely gonna take the Chiefs over the Bills. The Chiefs these days seem to be winning a lot. I know they lost to the Broncos and kind of got blown out, but that game didn't really matter.
It didn't matter.
The Chiefs like barely win, but they always win. Patrick Mahomes somehow always comes through, and I think the Bills lost their last game, right?
No,
No, the Bills
no.
won. I'm sorry,
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah,
Bills
yeah.
won their last game, but they looked a little bit shaky to me. So I'm gonna go Chiefs in that one. I just think at the end of the day that they're gonna carry it, and then remind me who's in the other matchup
We have the
tomorrow.
Commanders and Eagles.
Oh yeah. So I will take I'm gonna take the Commanders in that one. Jaden Daniels is really shining, and so I think that's gonna continue. I love to see that. And I don't know, the Eagles, they're just not giving me good vibes these
Yeah.
days.